And now, as you've had this business career and made so many moves and been very successful at that, all of a sudden that's interrupted by a call from the church to go back to Japan, where you served as a young man. Was that a surprise?
I guess I should say yes, I was surprised, but the influence of the Spirit, a lot of times we get feelings as to what the Lord may have in store for us. So in a way it was surprising, but in another way it wasn't. And I'd loved and admired my mission president, and probably like a lot of young men who serve missions, you love your mission president, you look up to him and think, oh, he's
Quote
so great
him
and
the rest of
wonderful.
your life.
Quote him the rest of your life. And in the back of your mind, you may never verbalize this, but you may say, gee, wouldn't it be great if someday the Lord felt like I could do something like this? And so we were very blessed to go back and serve. I was 45 when I was called to be mission president, and my sweetheart agreed to go with me, and she had a great experience, and the missionaries loved her, and we were in Tokyo for 3 years, and then we went back for 3 more years as a general authority. So I like to say that when we got married in the Salt Lake Temple, she didn't know 6 years in Japan was part of the deal.
I was happy though to get out. I always liked going to Europe and doing things that.
So you enjoyed the international experiences.
The language, of course, was a challenge, but I learned Survivor Japanese, and I was able to get along. And to me, it was just, I always told my missionaries, hey, anybody can go anywhere, but this is an adventure, and
right.
And you got to just look forward to it. So that's kind of how I've liked it my whole life.
One of the great secrets of the church is what great service the wives of mission presidents render. Because a lot of times the mission president served in that country as a young man. He knows the country, he knows the language. And many times the wife doesn't know the country, doesn't know the language.
Yes,
and yet the wives of mission presidents go with great faith and devotion and do their very best. And the same with the wives of general authorities. The wives of these general authorities go with their husbands wherever they're assigned, whether it's South America or South Africa or Moscow, and that's a real sacrifice, and it's a real challenge, and yet you never hear a word of complaint, and they go, and even though they may be away from their grandchildren. So I have great admiration for the wives of the leaders of the church for what they do.
Yes, and it would be impossible for the men to serve without those good wives.
That's right. If your wife stays home, you don't go.
Right. It just has to be a team all the way. And
well, I knew it was the love of his life, was his mission in Japan. So.
Now let's talk about that a little bit more. Japan had changed somewhat since you were there the last time, before you were the mission president. How had Japan changed, and especially in relationship to the church? How had the church changed in that time?
Well, when I was in Japan as a young man, as a young missionary, everybody was a convert to the church. There wasn't, there were a couple of cases that were not, but virtually everybody's first generation member of the church. When I went back 25 years later as the mission president, it had changed, and we're now having, the earlier members of the church now had families, and they were raising their children in the church. And then we went back again in the area presidency, and now we're getting a multi-generation church in Japan. I'm sure this is similar in many parts of the world.
Right.
The missionaries go in initially. The church is mainly comprised of young people, mostly teenagers or people in their early 20s who join the church. But now we have a multi-generation church. And so that's one of the great ways that the church grows, is we get a multi-generation church. And that's what we have now in Japan and Korea, and I'm sure many other parts of the world.
And sometimes when you leave your mission with the missionaries, you think you're never going to see the Japanese ones again. But when we went back, we ran into them all the time, and they're either serving as a branch president and had a wife, and and I always said, well, see, you got to marry that beautiful girl because you worked so hard when you're on our mission. And
My wife used to tell the elders the good, hard-working, obedient missionaries are the ones that get the cute wives when they get
yeah,
home.
well, everybody says that just to scare them a little bit.